avete mai sentito parlare di David Marsh, alcuni di voi non lo conoscono. È l'uomo CLIL. È l'uomo CLIL. L'uomo CLIL perché a metà degli anni 90 ha inventato questa nuova modalità di insegnamento, rendendo quello che in altre parti del mondo...
I have no sound. Can you hear me? I have no sound.
Can you hear us, David? No? No sound. You don't have a microphone? Don't you have a microphone?
Can you hear me, David, now? No. Okay. Okay, we'll go back.
Tony, can you hear me?
Yes. We can hear you.
Can you hear me? Okay, that's good. Okay. Well, I think what we'll do is we'll start, but I cannot hear you. I know there are a lot of you in the room. I can't actually see you, but I know that you are the la crème de la crème of Italian education, and it's a real pleasure to be able to talk with you all this morning. If we go to the next slide. So to the next slide. Firstly, a very warm thank you to my dear colleagues who I know who will be with you today, Jyvaskyla Lange, Kamal Merikunan, Teresa Ting, amongst others. A very warm hello to you, and also to Anna and Tony for organizing this event for me today. Thank you very much. And also a word of thanks in advance to the people who are doing the workshops this afternoon, because the insights that you have on methodologies for teaching through the medium of another language, usually English in your case, are invaluable, and I'm sorry that I can't be there with you today. If we go to the next slide, Tony. There are 5 things that I wanted to bring to you this morning in order to open this event. Just 5 dynamics that are going on at the moment in the world of CLIL. And one of these, the first of these, involves language and literacy. And you know, we are at an age where literacy is becoming not only fast changing, but also extremely important for the learning of any subjects. The language of science is changing very rapidly. The use of Italian, because of digital technologies, is changing very rapidly, and the language of English is changing very rapidly. So what you're engaged with is much more than supporting the learning of English of your students. You're actually involved in a large-scale sense of change, process of change, which involves language and communication. And one of the very interesting things that those of you who have done the training programs in Oxford and Edinburgh, and those of you who will be learning from those people, is that actually, if you can teach well in English in an Italian school, you'll see that there's an effect back on how you teach in Italian. So we're looking here at more than English, we're looking at actually more than language, we're looking at really good pedagogy. And if we could go to the next slide, Tony. This is a free publication which you can download from the address at the top there, www.viu.es. And this actually contains about 25 practical ideas for enabling teaching through English to be successful in both higher education and also in VET or in higher technical education. So this may be of practical interest to some of you in the audience, in case you're interested. It's a new form of toolkit which was put together by 3 people involved in the area. A second thing that's happening at the moment, if we can go to the next slide, Tony. is that the curriculum for learning any subject, English, science, physics, chemistry, whatever, is actually changing very rapidly in those countries which are quickly improving the quality of education throughout their systems. So again, when we talk about teaching through English and teaching well through English, when we're talking about CLIL, we're actually talking about a new concept of how the curriculum looks like in modern education and how it needs to be implemented. And of course, one of the key issues here is enabling students to learn how to learn and enabling students to learn as they use and use as they learn, not as in my education, learn now for use later. So the whole issue of competence-based education is critically important now throughout the education system. And when you look at the methodologies of CLIL, you are looking very quickly at immediate competence building in both the language and the subject. So again, the second point here is that we're dealing with something very modern. If we could go to the next slide, Tony. And what I've been doing over the last year or two is looking at high-performing educational systems, those systems which have enabled change to happen and which are now sort of reaching the top of the world in terms of quality. I'm actually speaking to you today from my daughter's bedroom. It's the room in the house with the best equipment. And from Finland, which, as many of you will know, is common. Also, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, which have seen a steady trajectory towards quality, countries which has seen us. And I want to just talk a little bit about what is happening in those really successful countries, because what is happening there is very closely geared to CLIL methodology. Could we take the next slide, Tony? Quality is a very easy word to say in English, as I'm sure it is in Italian. And it's an interesting word in terms of how we should be teaching and how students should be learning in the present day. Let me show you one aspect of quality which is very important. The next slide, please, Tony. We go to the next slide. Yeah. The research on school leadership, and by that I don't only mean the principle of the whole school, I mean how teachers lead learning processes, is absolutely huge in terms of the outcomes, the learning outcomes of the students. There's a 20% clear difference between an outstanding teacher or leader, a teacher as a leader, and an average one, and something like a 40 to 60% difference between a poor teacher leader and an outstanding teacher leader. Those differences are huge. Now, when we talk about CLIL and when we look at CLIL methodology, it's not that we're doing things, let's say in English, that we couldn't do in Italian, but it is opening doors to allow us to look not only at how to handle the teaching through English, but also how to reflect back on how we teach normally through Italian. And it enables us to take a fresh look at our work as teachers and at how we should be doing what we're doing. If we go to the next slide, Tony. These countries that are doing so well, and you must be, tired of hearing about Finland and so on, and PISA results, especially when Pisa is a prominent city in your own country. But if we go to the next slide, Tony, which do so well on reading, on maths and science, which constantly outperforming, there are certain things which they're doing. We go to the next slide, Tony. And there are these key things which are happening in the very, very different countries. And I think this is important because if we talk about Finland, which is a country of 5 million people, far away from you, you can easily say, well, what works in Finland is not going to work here. But when you look carefully at what they're doing in Finland, in Australia, in New Zealand, and in these other fast-developing educational systems, you will see that they are achieving teaching and learning excellence, and you will see that that is very close to how we are recommending that people teach successfully through the medium of English. If we go to the next slide, Tony. And I give you just one example relating to creativity and thinking skills. When we talk about language and communication and learning, it's not just the language we should be focusing on. It's not just the subject we should be focusing on. It's the thinking skills which enable these students to successfully learn the subject in order to develop certain competencies in both the subject and the language. And a recent study on why is it so difficult to develop creativity in our systems leads to these results on the next slide, Tony. One of the key issues is that teachers say, it's very hard for me alone to actually develop a high level of creativity in my lesson. Now, this may be an English teacher who says, I don't have enough time. I have the knowledge, I have the skills, I have possibly wonderful, motivated students, but I don't have enough time. The teacher of mathematics may say, my curriculum is so heavy, I don't have enough time to enable my students to develop these clever ideas that I know are important because of the exams and because of pressure and because of time and so on. So one of the key success factors in enabling real change to happen in a curriculum, in a school like yours, is through teamwork. And if you look now at teaching through English, you have a golden opportunity for the language teachers and the content teachers to work together as equal parties in looking at how could we do this successfully so that both the language and the content are gained, and how can we do it so that actually we're introducing the kind of dynamic methodologies which really do develop the thinking skills of these students and which lead to creativity. So this is a very hot issue, this issue of working in new teams with the same aims in a collaborative way, which takes us back to leadership, because the leadership has to understand that in the school in order for this thing to flourish. But anyway, we take the next slide. Sorry. Another thing which is happening in these very successful countries concerns empowering educators. Quality requires that teachers are empowered. In those countries in the graph, which we looked at earlier, which are going down steadily in terms of quality, and one of those is the United Kingdom, for sure, if you look at the types of statistics which are not coming through the actual governmental measures, it's a governmental system itself, you'll see that teachers are disempowered. They are controlled. They are given more and more work. They are given more and more reporting tasks to show how they're doing their work. And it is quite clear that actually, because of the type of job that teaching is, it requires a high degree of autonomy by the teacher, him or herself. So in CLIL, what we recommend is that we create the teams, and that the teams together are much stronger than individuals alone, and that they carry the responsibility to carefully introduce the teaching through English programs, to be guided by mentors outside, such as those in your Italian universities, such as through those experts who've been doing this for a long time, who are possibly in the room today, and who feel empowered to actually move forwards. And one of the tricks here is not to take on too much too quickly. It's to move forward step by step. It's to carefully look at the impact on the students of the teaching through English, And it is to address those worries, concerns, or challenges as they arise from parents, from leaders, from others at the time at which they come. So empowering educators is a very interesting issue. And if we look at the next slide, Tony, when CLIL methodology was becoming really understood, it was very interesting to see how close it was to the kinds of literacy which we're seeing now happening from the exposure of young people to the new technologies. Now, I personally don't see a great role for the use of tablet computers and other devices in the classroom, but I can see a vital role that we understand how these young people use the technologies and for what purpose, and that we try to develop their learning of science or their learning of English using their digital devices in their own time. This is happening now in certain countries where not only is education being seen to be really good, but English language development is very, very fast. So this is number 4. This is actually recognizing that the answer is not necessarily to give these youngsters opportunities to use these machines in class, but the answer is to understand the impact that they have on their lives and how they can support the teaching. Tony, the next slide, if you don't mind. There are certain things happening in the mind and the brain of these young people which is having a negative impact on bad teaching methodologies. Bad teaching is always bad teaching. But nowadays, because of the high exposure, and if we go to the next slide, which is where, we have reports, this one is from the United States, of 51.66 or nearly 52 hours per week of using digital devices by children from a very young age. It's absolutely huge. And it's having an impact on the preferred learning styles of these young people, both boys and girls. Boys in particular are suffering if they are used to this kind of media use in their private lives, and they come to school and they sit there and they find their teaching boring. They are suffering very badly. In fact, some people say that in certain countries like the United States, the reason that there is such a rise in what they call attention deficit disorder is due to these machines. While other people say, well, actually, it's not that the children necessarily have attention deficit disorder, it's just that education is so out of sync with how they want to learn, that they are becoming restless and more difficult in some of our schools and colleges. Now, this may not be the case in your own environments, but it is a very, very important factor, which leads us to the next issue, if we can, Tony. To the next slide, Tony. Which relates to health and well-being. And this is the fifth, it's the fourth, it's the fifth. It should be the fifth. This is the fifth issue that I want to bring to you very, very quickly here. If you have only a monolingual school environment where all of the teaching is in Italian, the children, they just use Italian, the students and so on all of the time, it will not be as enriching to the mind and brain as an environment where they switch from one language to another, even if that's to a small extent. And this research, and I know that Teresa, for example, is an expert in this area, this research is very, very exciting in terms of why. Why should I, Giovanni, get involved with trying to teach my subject through the medium of another language, be it English? Could be any other language, French, Spanish, or whatever, but if it's English, it's just another language. Why? The impact on the brain and mind, if you can take the next slide, is very, very interesting in terms of even a small amount of quality learning through another language. Why? Because through CLIL, these students are actually using the language as they learn. Okay, the thinking skills are engaged through good methodologies right from the beginning. They are not learning passively as they may learn science or math, science, English in other contexts. They're actually learning in a challenging way. And this relates to this keyword, neuroplasticity, which has become profoundly important over the last 20 years in terms of how we understand the brain. And if we take the next slide, Tony. And what it's developing is, it's developing something called situational adaptability. It is giving young people even better skills. And of course, they would have these skills through monolingual Italian-only education, but it's giving them even better skills to learn how to adapt themselves, their communication, their thinking to different contexts. And Tony, the next slide. One of these is to enhance the flexibility of the mind. It's to enhance looking at things in different directions, from different perspectives. The second one, Tony, is enhanced problem-solving skills. The research on this shows that those who study in dual language environments are more successful at higher order thinking demands, at challenging problem solving. With simple problem solving, there's no difference. But the problem solving capacities of being able to look through something from two languages is very interesting. Aha, you say, but doesn't this only relate to those youngsters who have a very high command of Italian and a very high command of English? And the answer is no, this can kick in very quickly from relatively low exposure to learning through another language. The next one, Tony, is that there's a whole impact on learning in general, and one of the most important things here is that there's a stimulus in the short-term memory, and that stimulated short-term working memory would have a beneficial impact on learning throughout the curriculum. If you like, if you take a student who spends 25 hours studying in a school, an adolescent, if they have 3 hours of learning through another language, it is like an oxygen in the whole week's curriculum. So the teaching through English can have an impact on the teaching through Italian of other subjects. And the next one, Tony. And the final benefit here relates to interpersonal skills. The research done a long time ago in the Netherlands showed how quite a lot, I must admit, but quite a lot of teaching strengthened the command and knowledge of the first language. It's to do with developing meta-linguistic awareness. It's to do with being able to stand on two languages and look at the subject, geography, history, whatever, through two different perspectives, and actually enhancing the interpersonal communication skills of these students. And if one of our objectives is to prepare Italian students for higher education, for further education, then this is a quality for sure which is very, very significant in what we're doing. Okay, the last one, number 6. I take it that my maths is very bad. I do apologize to the maths teachers in the room. There are 6 issues I wanted to bring you today, not 5, and this is the final one, and it's number 6. How can we do things differently? Number 1, do it voluntarily. It is essential that any of us who want to get involved with teaching through another language, English, are actually doing it because we believe that it is a reasonable and meaningful thing to do. Number 2 is that if we do this, we look at the teamwork issue and we start small. We start small. And number 3 is, don't try to take a whole subject and decide, okay, from 3 months from now, I'm going to teach a whole heavy subject through the medium of English. Look at the possibility of taking something bite-sized, some kind of module, preferably a module which runs across different subjects, and do that in a team collaborative way with the teachers of English, but also with the teachers of other subjects. Because at the end of the day, the methodologies that we use are slightly different in different subjects, and there are good methodologies and less good methodologies, but actually there's a lot to learn for English teaching, just as there's a lot to learn for mathematics teaching. So, across the world, people are looking at the challenges of teaching through English. There are opportunities out there. There are interesting solutions. I know you're going to be learning about quite a few of those this afternoon. And again, I wish I was there to hear about those, because the best instructors will be those who have actually learned themselves by exploring different methodologies. And I know you will have a voice with those today. If we take the next slide, Tony. This is a new publication that I wrote from last year, which outlines the history of where CLIL has come from, and also kind of looks to the future. So if you are interested in reading more on the basis of what you've heard today, then take a look at this one. And if we take the next slide, Tony. I can't see the slide. Has it come up? Maybe. We're all having a lot of difficulties at the moment. Let's face it. I mean, Italy's having difficulties, Finland's having difficulties, Europe's having difficulties, we're having difficulties throughout the world. I do believe that difficulties or challenges do create opportunities. And I've worked for over 20 years with a lot of teachers in Italy and in other countries in Europe. And what I've been told is this: David, when I started this, I thought I was crazy. I thought, this is mad, you know, my English is not good enough, I don't have enough time, But sometime later they'll say, David, I'm really glad I got involved in this, because I found it, as a teacher, as an educator, invigorating. I think, if we go to the next slide, Tony, there are opportunities which can enrich our lives, and it does seem that doing something as extraordinary as teaching through English in an Italian vet school is actually such an opportunity, and the time is very much now in order to do that. And if we go to the last slide, Tony, I have one word of Italian to actually put on the table to the audience, and it is grazie, thank you very much, and I wish you all a really successful conference. And I can see you clapping. That's very kind. And also, I hope I might be able to meet some of you in Venice, where there'll be a major conference on CLIL next year. So from me, I'm saying, I can see my head is shaking. I'm not shaking normally like that. I say thank you very much, and goodbye.